Justin Bieber was rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night, and no one got an official explanation. There was no statement, no press conference, no clear diagnosis. It started as a rumor, the way these things always do. A name whispered at the emergency entrance, a security guard texting someone they shouldn't, a receptionist who swallowed a gasp at the wrong moment. But inside the hospital, people didn't need confirmation. They felt it in the air. Dr. Emanuel didn't hear the rumor as a sentence. He felt it as a change in rhythm. First, a frantic call from ambulance dispatch, more nervous than usual. Then, a receptionist's eyes flicking down the corridor toward the back, where VIP patients were usually hidden. Then, the sound of wheels racing down the hall, followed by an unnatural hush at the nurses' station. This was not the simple quiet of professionalism. It was the heavy silence of people who suddenly knew too much. Someone in the reception area said it out loud once, too loudly, before everyone decided they should never say it again. "They say it's him," one orderly muttered. "Justin Bieber." The name sat there like a dropped tray. Nobody reacted openly, but everything changed. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Nurses turned their badges around so cameras wouldn't catch their names. Doors were left half-closed, as if the hospital itself were suddenly afraid of being seen. Emanuel had no interest in celebrity gossip. He dealt in vital signs, blood panels, scan results. But he'd worked long enough to know one thing clearly. Rumors change behavior, and behavior leads to truth. The patient arrived under a different name. The chart said something forgettable. The face on the stretcher, swollen, bruised, half hidden under a drying streak of blood, was harder to disguise. Security ushered him straight into room 208, the only room on the floor where the blinds were drawn before the patient even arrived. For days, the hospital moved around that room the way people walk around a wound they don't want to touch. Staff lowered their voices when they passed. Some nurses suddenly became very interested in working on another floor. Others volunteered for extra shifts there and then refused to talk about it afterward. One of them was Anna Maria. Emanuel found her in the staff locker room one evening, sitting on a bench with her back pressed to the metal lockers, one hand clamped over her mouth as if holding in either a scream or a confession. Her uniform was slightly crooked. Her pulse, he could see, hammered at the base of her throat. He sat beside her without asking. "Is it true?" she whispered, not looking at him. "Is what true?" he asked, even though he already knew what she meant. "They say it's him," she murmured. "Justin. The vans are outside. Security says we can't use the front entrance for breaks anymore. And they told us if anything leaks, we're finished." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "They didn't say it like a threat," she added. "They said it like a reminder." Emanuel didn't answer. It wasn't whether the rumor was true that interested him. It was what the rumor was doing to his staff. Nurses who came out of room 208 had the look of people who had swallowed a secret. Eyes unfocused, movements mechanical, and something tight in the jaw, like they were holding their own tongues in place. "Go home, Anna," he said gently. "Sleep. If you can't make it through a shift tomorrow, I'll sign you off." She nodded but did not move. Her fingers tightened on his sleeve, just for a moment. "What if the vans are here for real?" she asked. "What if this is bigger than us?" He didn't say what he was thinking, that almost everything was bigger than them, and that was never an excuse to stop doing their jobs. Room 208 looked like any other room on paper. A bed, a monitor, an IV stand. The difference was in the details. The curtain always pulled. The door never quite left open. Security guards who happened to walk that corridor more often than any other. Family visitors whose names didn't match any file. The chart said the patient had been in a car accident. Multiple contusions, a concussion, some bruised ribs. Serious, yes, but not unusual. The scans were bad, but not catastrophic. Neurology had written possible prolonged recovery and recommended sedation while the swelling eased. That would have justified a few days of heavier drugs, not weeks. Yet the sedation levels stayed high, too high, and someone kept turning the dial up just when his body seemed ready to handle less. It bothered Emanuel, not like a scandal, more like an off note in a familiar song. He asked the pharmacy for the sedative logs. They sent him a printout. He compared them to the chart. The doses didn't match. Some entries were overwritten. A few had been added after the fact in a different ink color. The timestamps had a strange rhythm, extra doses at odd hours, most of them falling in the middle of night shifts. And the same handful of nurses kept appearing on those night logs. That took him back to the nurses' station, to the names, and eventually to Tamirez. 7 years he'd known her. Head nurse, efficient, unflappable, the type of person who could move through chaos and leave order behind. Today, she looked like someone holding her breath. "How is 208?" she asked casually as he entered the med room. "Stable," he said, "for someone who, according to these scans, shouldn't need that much sedation anymore." He watched her face closely. "What are you getting at, doctor?" she asked. "There are discrepancies in the sedative logs," he answered. "Cameras that go down exactly when those doses are adjusted. Nurses who refuse to talk when they come off that shift." Her shoulders stiffened. She didn't deny anything. She also didn't admit. "We follow orders," she said finally, "and we were told this case needs special handling. For his safety, for ours." Emanuel didn't push her. Not then. Instead, he went to the one place that never lied: the machines. Radiology was dim, the hum of equipment filling the silence. The tech loaded the latest scans. Emanuel watched as slices of brain, bone, and tissue flickered on screen. "He's sedated more than he needs to be," the tech said quietly. "These images aren't coma level. If he's not responding, it's partly chemical. Someone wants him kept under." "Who signs the dosages?" Emanuel asked, though he already knew the pattern he'd find. "The nurses," the tech said, "night nurses. But the orders? They show as verbal from higher up. Maintain sedation, per request. That's all it says." A fake name on the chart? Heavy sedation that didn't fit the scans. Camera outages? Secretive staff. And a name hovering over everything like a shadow: Justin Bieber. On its own, none of it was proof. Together, it was a map. That night, Emanuel started asking more direct questions. Not in front of everyone, never as an interrogation. He caught Violetta, one of the younger nurses, at the end of her shift, fingers nervously tracing the edge of her badge lanyard. "How's 208?" he asked, as if it were an ordinary check-in. She took too long to answer. "We're doing our best," she said. Her voice wobbled. "That's not what I asked," he replied gently. "I asked how it is, for you." She stared at him for a moment, then looked down. "They told us not to talk," she whispered. "Who?" She hesitated. Fear battled with exhaustion on her face. "His team," she said at last. "They came the second night. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't have to. They said the world doesn't get to see him weak. Not like this. They said if any image, any detail comes out, we'll all be thrown under the bus. The hospital, us, our families, everything." "And you believed them?" he asked. "They didn't talk like they were making a threat," she said. "They talked like they were stating a fact." From then on, the pattern of the nurses' strange behavior began to make an awful kind of sense. They weren't acting crazy. They were acting controlled. They turned cameras off exactly when certain visitors arrived. They adjusted sedatives without writing full reasons in the chart. They walked out of 208 with that same haunted look, because they were constantly being forced to choose between their ethics and their survival. But the detail none of them could shake, the one thing they were most afraid to mention, happened one night around 3 in the morning. It was supposed to be a routine check. Violetta was alone in the room, blinds closed, monitor beeping a slow, steady rhythm. Justin lay there, skin washed out under the fluorescent light, lips dry, hair messy. He looked like a kid, not a headline. As she checked the monitor, the sedation drip slowed slightly, just a fraction, not enough for anyone to notice on paper. Enough for him to twitch. His fingers moved first. Then his eyelids fluttered. Violetta froze, hand still on the IV line. His lips parted. No full word came out, more a scratch of breath than a sentence. But in that sound, she swore she heard a single, desperate syllable. Stop. Stop the sedation? Stop the visitors? Stop the people making decisions over his unconscious body? He didn't get to finish. Another nurse, panicking, called the on-call physician, who wasn't Emanuel. The sedative was pushed back up, the dose bumped higher for comfort. By the time morning came, the logs had been corrected. The incident didn't exist. Only Violetta's memory kept it alive. She told no one until the day Emanuel asked the right question the right way. When she finally said it, he saw relief and terror collide in her eyes. The next day, a meeting was called behind closed doors. The message was clear. No names, no stories, no talk. Not to family, not to friends, not to other staff, and definitely not to lawyers or press. Behavior changed overnight. Too clean, too synchronized, too unnatural. That was the behavior no one was allowed to mention. Not hysteria, not something supernatural, but the way a group of overworked, underpaid nurses were quietly turned into silent accomplices in a story they didn't write. Emanuel knew what came next would decide what kind of person he really was. He collected what he could. Copies of the original pharmacy logs before edits, timestamps of camera outages, staffing schedules, late-night visitor logs signed with vague surnames. He didn't leak. He didn't gossip. He went to the one person in the building who understood both law and fear, the hospital lawyer, a man named Eustace. They met in a small office that smelled of paper and old coffee. "I'm not trying to start a scandal," Emanuel said. "I'm trying to stop one from being buried on top of my staff." He laid it all out. The rumor, the fake name, the sedation mismatch, the nurse's fear, the team who had effectively taken over the room after dark. Eustace listened without interrupting. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "Let me be clear," he said. "We are not dealing with a monster. We're dealing with machinery, money, reputation, people who think they can buy silence." He looked at the records again. "And we are also dealing with nurses who compromised protocols under pressure, out of fear they'd lose everything." He tapped the folder with one finger. "We're going to need the truth from them," he said. "All of it. And we're going to need to protect them at the same time. Mercy doesn't mean no consequence. It means proportion." Emanuel nodded. It was what he had hoped to hear. The next days were a slow, careful unraveling. Not a courtroom drama, not a viral confession, just small, scared testimonies given in quiet rooms over lukewarm coffee. The nurses admitted what they'd done, turned cameras off when told, altered logs under pressure, let unregistered visitors slip in and out because those visitors came with powerful names and unspoken threats. They had not hurt Justin. They had, in their minds, protected him from the press, from humiliation, from the glare of a world that would turn his weakness into fuel. But in protecting, they crossed lines. Emanuel thought for them anyway. He argued that they were employees trapped between their ethics and their rent payments, that they did the wrong thing for understandable reasons, that the real blame lay higher, with those who weaponized Justin's name and condition. Quietly, the hospital shifted. Oversight was reinforced. Camera logs were centralized and locked. Future VIP cases would require dual sign-offs, not just a wink and a verbal order. The nurses faced consequences, ethics training, written warnings, some suspensions, but not public ruin. As for Justin, he never knew the full story. He eventually woke in another facility, under a different team, his memory of that time fogged by trauma and medication. Whatever he'd almost whispered in room 208 stayed trapped in the minds of those who heard him. Outside, the rumor that he had once been there burned for a few days, then dissolved into the endless stream of new headlines. Fans speculated, tabloids guessed, but nothing was confirmed. The hospital issued one careful statement. No celebrity patients were being discussed. Privacy laws. End of story. Inside, the real story lingered as a bruise. Emanuel walked past room 208 many nights afterwards. The bed was different. The patient was different. But sometimes, when the corridor was quiet and the monitor's green line pulsed in the dark, he thought about how close they'd come to letting fear completely rewrite their ethics. He also thought about the nurses, how their strange behavior hadn't been madness or obsession, but survival instinct twisted by power. Justin Bieber was rushed to the hospital, and the nurses did show a behavior no one was allowed to mention. Not because they were crazy, because they were terrified. And one doctor decided that for once, gossip would not be the thing that forced the truth out. Conscience would.